Good evening, everyone. Hello, welcome. Welcome to the Trinity Long Room Hub on this fresh autumn evening. My name is Tim Starr. I'm the head of the History of Art and Architecture department here, but more importantly, I'm a member of the Trinity Centre for Environmental Humanities, which is one of the co-organisers of this event, led by my colleague Jamie Rohu, along with the Irish Wildlife Trust, of course. This is the second talk in a series of 3 on rewilding in. Many of you might have either attended or seen online the first talk on rewilding in Ireland. This evening we're going to look at examples of rewilding in Scotland. There's a third talk on the 26th of November, speakers to be confirmed, on rewilding in Europe, not rewilding Europe, which might be a different thing. Our 2 speakers are going to speak for roughly 40 minutes or so. And then we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So if you can, I know it's hard sometimes when you have a very burning question or a grumble or a point of contention, if you can just hold them to the end, and then Kieran Flood from the Irish Wildlife Trust is going to chair a Q&A session. Our 2 speakers are Peter Cairns and Louise Ramsay. Peter has spent the best part of 30 years immersed in Scotland's rewilding conversation. He was the founder of the rewilding charity Scotland, The Big Picture, and he now works independently as a commentator on rewilding and wildlife coexistence. So, Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Tim, and good evening. Thanks very much indeed for inviting me. This is my first visit back to Ireland in 32 years, I think it was. I was working out. So, really delighted to be here. Thank you. We were eating lunch on a high rimrock when we saw what we thought was a doe fording a torrent. When she climbed the bank towards us, we realised our mistake. It was a wolf. In those days, we'd never heard of passing up a chance to kill a wolf, and in a second we were pumping lead. When our rifles were empty, the old wolf was down. We reached her in time to watch a fierce, green fire dying in her eyes. I realised then, and have known ever since, that there was something new to me in those eyes, something known only to her and to the mountain. But I was young back then and full of trigger itch. I thought that because fewer wolves meant more deer, that no wolves would mean hunter's paradise. But after seeing that green fire die, I sensed that neither the wolf nor the mountain agreed with such a view. That passage was written in 1949 by Aldo Leopold, the American hunter turned conservationist and writer, taken from his essay, Thinking Like a Mountain. The encounter with the female wolf changed Leopold profoundly. He stopped shooting wolves, and he developed a deep appreciation and understanding of the complex web of relationships between different species and their environment. He began thinking like a mountain. So why am I talking about wolves coming from a country that has none? Well, because I believe the future for nature recovery anywhere hinges on how we as a society think and feel about the landscapes around us and the species that share our space. And no animal challenges us more than the wolf. They ask us questions that cut to the heart of rewilding. Can we give up space for nature? Can we sanction risk and uncertainty? Can we cope with change? Can we fall back in love with the wild? Can we think like a mountain? So a very good evening. My name is Peter Cairns. I've spent much of what is very loosely referred to as my career as a conservation photographer, a visual storyteller, if you like. And in the late 90s, I travelled to Yellowstone National Park in the US, inspired by Leopold's writings, but also drawn to a story that had emerged a few years earlier. And that story was about wolves. So in 1995, wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone 60 years after they were hunted to extinction. And it remains probably the most high-profile act of rewilding anywhere in the world. So why did a country that went to great extremes to get rid of wolves embark on a hugely controversial journey to return them just 60 years later? Well, that question's been rattling around in my head for many, many years. But let's just zoom out and turn the clock back. This is a painting by John Gast called American Progress. And it shows Columbia, the female figure there, leading early colonisers into the West and clearing before them anything that gets in the way of progress. Native peoples, buffaloes, grizzly bears, mountain lions, and of course wolves. These pioneers saw themselves as entitled, obligated. They were, in their mind at least, doing God's work, clearing the earth of any living creature that moveth upon it. And the values depicted in this painting say a lot about American history, and they still resonate today, especially when it comes to wolves. So I spent a lot of time in North America speaking with lots of different people, hunters, ranchers, scientists, researchers, tourism operators, and just normal families about wolves. And very quickly, almost without exception, those conversations turned from being about wolves themselves to about how people frame wolves in their minds, in their imaginations. Many Americans love wolves. They hold them up as the ultimate symbol of the wild. They somehow make nature whole again. Returning them was a moral imperative. It was righting an historic wrong. Many Americans hate wolves. Their reintroduction was seen as government overreach, a threat to traditional lifestyles and livelihoods. They felt that wolves were an imposition placed upon fragile rural communities. The reintroduction of wolves was seen by some as an affront on the very identity of rural America, the antithesis to American progress. And this was borne out by many of the ranchers that I spoke with, who they didn't hate wolves necessarily, at least not all of them, but they resented their return because it challenged their custodianship of the land. It challenged their sense of control over wild nature. Wolves were an embodiment of those urban liberal bureaucrats far away in Washington who they didn't know, who they didn't trust, who had no skin in their game. And as I've travelled to different parts of the world, exploring this fault line where people and wildlife meet and collide, that same narrative has played out again and again and again. The species might change from country to country, the landscape and the actors might change, but the story remains pretty much the same. The way we think and feel about our landscapes and the wildlife within them is closely tied to our values as individuals, what we believe to be right and wrong, who we are and what we stand for. And in turn, those values are shaped by a complex range of factors: our parents, our social background, our education, our peer groups, even our religious persuasions. These things all influence how we view the world, and specifically how we view other species that share our world. There are people, for example, who vilify foxes, quite happy to see them ripped apart in the name of cultural tradition. There are other people who love foxes and dedicate their whole lives to caring for them. Different worldviews fueled by different personal values. And then, of course, it's human nature for people who share similar values to come together, forming tribes. And within those tribes, those values are reinforced, amplified. They become entrenched, militant even. We end up believing in our own tribal truths, a set of hard and fast commandments that provide the foundation for how we see the world and how we fight for control, power, and a sense of identity. People sometimes say to me, it must be great having a job in rewilding, working with all these amazing wildlife species. And I say, yeah, that must be great. But that's not what I do. For the most part, my work is with just one species, this one. Because this is the species that holds the key to the rewilding door. Rewilding, nature restoration, ecological recovery, call it what you will, is 20% ecology, trees in the ground, beavers in the river. That's the easy bit in many ways, and 80% psychology. Wolves might be the ultimate lightning rod for competing social, cultural and political values, but the same story plays out in Scotland with sea eagles, beavers and the growing conversation around lynx. The rewilding battleground, if indeed there is one, is for people's hearts and minds. I've not immersed myself in these conversations for the last 25 years because I enjoy conflict or because I like to see people disagreeing. It's because, in my view, this quote from Brett Jenks actually hits the nail on the head. If you want to save or rewild any species on Earth, there's really only one species that you have to fully understand, and that's us, Homo sapiens, because we are the primary cause, and therefore we are the primary solution for just about any climate or biodiversity challenge that you can think of. So recognising that rewilding is less about physical change to our land and sea and more about a reimagining of our relationship with wild nature led me to set up this charity in 2018, and I served as its CEO until just a couple of years ago. A couple of months ago, actually. A couple of years, wishing my life away. One of the first questions, as you might expect, when we sat down and talked about Scotland the Big Picture, was this one. Now, it's easy to believe the lurid, sensationalist headlines you read in the popular media, and if you do, you probably think rewilding is all about wolves coming back and farmers being dragged off their land. That's the narrative that plays into those tribal divisions. Definitions do vary, but for what it's worth, this was Scotland the Big Picture's definition: evolving process of nature recovery that leads to restored ecosystem health, function and completeness. We never claimed that this was the definition, simply that it's ours. Rewilding is an opportunity to restore abundance and diversity of life to our degraded land and sea so that they work in all their colourful complexity. It's an opportunity to stitch back together a tapestry of life where natural processes drive vibrant natural systems. Processes like predator-prey dynamics, carcass scavenging, birth, death, decay, regeneration. These are the processes that drive every healthy living system on the planet. Rewilding is about encouraging rivers shaded by corridors of alder and willow to run as they want to, as they need to, allowing natural debris like fallen trees to accumulate in river channels, enriching the water for insects, fish and bird life. Rewilding is about connectivity across the landscape, encouraging native woodland to expand, to regulate our climate, creating wildlife highways so that animals have the freedom to roam. And I think rewilding is also understanding that a forest, for example, is much more than just a sea of trees. It's a complex community of soil microbes, lichens, mosses, tall trees, tiny trees, dead and dying trees, all coming together in a constantly evolving system. Rewilding is about re-wetting, restoring Scotland's peatlands that across huge areas have been drained and burned, giving them a chance to store carbon, purify our water, as well as providing sanctuary for some of our most precious wildlife. I could go on, I often do, but at its most basic level, I would argue that rewilding is anything that counteracts more de-wilding, anything that joins up and enriches habitats rather than further fragment and degrade them, anything that leads to more nature and not less nature. Rewilding is also about building community wealth. Ecological recovery is only possible, or it's certainly much easier, when it works in tandem with communities to drive social and economic benefits. Contrary to popular misconceptions, rewilding does not mean de-peopling. Quite the opposite. People are finding new ways to build a career in nature-based businesses: tourism, food production, training, forestry, deer management, research, habitat restoration. These new enterprises or pathways will help make rewilding an economically viable land use choice. So, another key question: why is rewilding needed? Well, if we zoom right out, it's because the world faces two existential crises: climate breakdown and global nature loss. Two emergencies that are inextricably linked. We can't fix one without fixing both. We're in the middle of the United Nations decade on ecosystem restoration. This is the first time there's been a global movement to restore our degraded living systems and the systems on which we all depend. Now, some countries are doing okay, but sadly, Scotland, and I have to say Ireland, isn't one of them. In 2023, the latest State of Nature report was published, and it revealed that from 240 countries worldwide, measured for their biodiversity intactness, the completeness of their nature, if you like. This is where Scotland ranks. We're one of the wealthiest, best educated countries in the world, and yet somehow we've sunk to the bottom of a global league table. Just 3% of Scotland's native woodlands remain. 80% of Scotland's peatlands are considered damaged. 54% of flowering plants have declined since 1970. And of course, as habitats have deteriorated, so too has the abundance and diversity of life, with 11% of Scotland's species now threatened with national extinction. Many animals are lost already. And what is also lost in this process is the interaction and interdependency of all species, those vital, infinitely complex natural processes that enable nature to work. There is no biophysical reason why Scotland, or indeed Ireland, can't restore wild forests teeming with life. There is no physical barrier preventing us allowing rivers to flow freely, creating a rich mosaic of wetlands shaped by beavers, echoing to the calls of cranes. It's not inevitable that we remain a nature-depleted nation. That's a choice. So what are the barriers? What is stopping Scotland doing more to make a meaningful contribution to restoring global ecosystems? Well, you'll know many of the answers. Money is a big barrier, of course. We know that. Government policy, patterns of land ownership in Scotland. We have one of the most concentrated patterns of land ownership anywhere. So these and many other factors all inhibit the speed and scale of nature recovery. But I think I would argue that there's another more fundamental barrier at work, and that comes back down to us and the way in which we view the world. There's a condition that I think to a degree we all suffer from, to varying degrees. I call it ecological blindness. For most people, landscapes like this are what Scotland looks like, what they feel Scotland should look like. And yes, it's dramatic, yes, it's maybe even beautiful, but if you look closely, you can see that this landscape's ecological complexity has all but disappeared. Centuries of burning, felling, draining and overgrazing have stripped our landscapes of the woodlands, wetlands and flower-rich meadows they once supported. We've arrived at a point where we celebrate, glamorise these tidy, orderly, sterile, some might say sanitised, picture postcard landscapes that are familiar, they're comfortable, they may even be iconic, but they fall way short of their ecological potential. But because we've managed our landscapes in a certain way for centuries, we've become blind to their ecological loss. There's another condition that in many ways is very similar to ecological blindness called shifting baseline syndrome. Some of you might have heard this. This is where each new generation accepts as normal the abundance and diversity of life they're born into. We have a real problem imagining a world different from the one that we grew up in. So over generations, our expectation of wild nature, what it should be, what it could be, gradually diminishes. To put this into perspective, I'm going to go back 200 years, which is a long time for us, but it's a real nanosecond, really, in geological time. But it's enough time for us all to succumb to shifting baseline syndrome. So back in the Victorian period, Scottish gamekeepers used to keep something that they called a gibbet list. It was a list of all the vermin that they killed. Now, the numbers I'm about to show you are from one West Coast estate recorded over 3 years between 1837 and 1840. So remember, these are all animals shot, trapped or poisoned on one estate in 3 years. Now, this is not a scientific report, and there may be some exaggeration at play, I don't know, but it gives you an insight into the scale and abundance of wildlife that I think most of us would struggle to imagine today. And yet that was just a matter of 100, 150 years ago. So where does traditional conservation fit into all of this? Well, if we're honest, it has failed to arrest and reverse ecological decline. Rewilding asks us to think beyond nature reserves, beyond national parks, beyond tiny fragments and threads of nature. It asks us to stretch our imaginations to what else might be possible rather than just settle for what is familiar. A key principle of rewilding is to let nature lead, to free natural processes at a landscape scale. So rather than having a defined endpoint in mind, rewilding is more content to let ecosystems evolve, allowing nature to exhibit its natural dynamism. There's a well-known wildlife biologist in the States called Doug Chadwick, who I think sums it up brilliantly. Doug says, the essence of nature is wholeness, a wholeness woven from infinite complexity. Trying to save nature piece by piece doesn't make sense, even if we had all the time in the world, and we don't. But if you think about it, for the last 30, 40, 50 years, conservationists have been trying to save nature piece by piece. Red squirrels, corncrakes, capercaillie, water voles, wildcats, brown hares, seabirds. At one time or another, we've had a go at saving them all with this pick and mix conservation. A rare species here, a fragment of habitat there. And there have been successes, don't get me wrong. The recovery of pine martens in the last couple of decades shows what can be achieved. And all we've done with martens is given them a little bit more space and stop killing them. And yet, I would argue that as a society, we still seem to struggle to see the big picture, to think like a mountain, to acknowledge that we're all bound up in an intricate web of life that ties us to the weather, the atmosphere, the seas, the soils, the plants, and every other living creature on the planet. So the bottom line is that we cannot carry on doing the same things over and over and over again and expecting different outcomes without healthy, functional and complete ecosystems, without natural assets like geology, soil, air, water, plants and animals. There is no life, and that's why we need rewilding. So where did Scotland's rewilding journey begin? Well, I would say it probably goes back 25 years or so, and early thinkers in Scotland included people like Alan Watson Featherstone, who founded Trees for Life, the legendary naturalist Roy Dennis. There were people like Philip Ashmole, Myrtle Ashmole, John Lister Kay, and without embarrassing Louise and Paul Ramsay, they were very much at the forefront of early rewilding conversations. Milestones along the way included the purchasing of Allerdale Estate in Sutherland in 2003. The rather rabid, if that's the right word, it's probably a bit polite actually, the owner, let's leave it at that. The owner had grand plans to create this sort of African-style game reserve, complete with wolves and bears and all the rest of it. And you can imagine that really did hit the headlines. It put the early version of rewilding on the map, rightly or wrongly. Fast forward a few years and rewilding brands started to emerge. They didn't necessarily use the word, but they used the principles. The RSPB's Futurescapes, the Wildlife Trust's Living Landscapes. Over on the continent, Rewilding Europe came into being in 2012, and that coincided with the recolonisation of wolves and lynx and bears, which in turn prompted broader conversations around ecosystem health and functionality. This was a real milestone, I think, a turning point, the publishing of Feral by George Monbiot in 2013. This book really started to poke holes in UK's land management. It looked at driven grouse shooting, sheep ranching, deer forests, and it actually took a really critical look at conservation itself. Some of you will be familiar with the Knepp Estate in Sussex, which started to hit the headlines with the owner's book, is his book called Wilding, and their new thinking really around the role of large herbivores, and Louise will talk about that a little bit later. Scotland the Big Picture held its first Big Picture conference in 2019. We budgeted for 100 people to buy tickets, and we sold 430, clearly indicating a growing appetite for rewilding information and rewilding stories. At that conference, we launched the Scottish Rewilding Alliance, which is now calling for Scotland to become the world's first rewilding nation. By the time the next conference came around in 2024, I think it's fair to say that rewilding had really hit the mainstream. It was in all the press, it was on the Archers. I don't know, do you get the Archers here? Yeah, okay. Beavers were on the way back, the volume around the return of lynx was increasing, etc., etc. And in the West Highlands, they also had their own Rewilding Centre, a world first. So looking back, a lot has happened in a relatively short space of time, and these milestones are really just scratching the surface of that journey. But none of these wins, if that's what you want to call them, have been easy or quick, because effectively what we're trying to do is to turn around a supertanker of really entrenched cultural, social, political and economic norms. Remember our Yellowstone rancher who felt that wolves were being imposed on him by the urban, left-wing, liberal, bunny-hugging, bobble-hatted vegans of Washington. His resentment of the federal government forcing change on his way of life and his livelihood. Well, you could replace that Montanan rancher with a Scottish gamekeeper, or I suspect an Irish farmer, and the conversation would be pretty much the same, for all the same reasons. So change is never, ever easy. All of that said, Scotland now boasts some of the most inspiring examples of rewilding anywhere, at many different scales and across different settings. This is Cairns Connect, a 200-year vision to restore 600 square kilometres of forest, peatland, loch and river right at the heart of the Cairns National Park. After centuries of intense management for grouse shooting and deer stalking, this landscape is being allowed to breathe, to recover, to start to govern itself. And in places like Glenfeshie, the ancient pines on the old floodplain now have tens of thousands of neighbours, sprightly young trees popping up next to their parents and grandparents, relieved of decades of grazing pressure. And as this landscape starts to become more complex, it's supporting a wildlife comeback. Hen harriers are returning after decades of being more or less absent. Golden eagles are breeding without fear of persecution. Black grouse numbers are surging. Semi-wild grazers are being used to replicate the grazing patterns of extinct herbivores, nutrient cycling, seed dispersal, habitat disturbance. And after an absence of 400 years, beavers are now back in the Cairns doing their beavery stuff in the wetlands. A similar story is developing on the opposite side of the Cairns. This is Mar Lodge Estate on Deeside, where huge areas are being given over to nature recovery. Again, you can see native woodland is regenerating. Peatland restoration is really gathering momentum. We now know, of course, that healthy peatlands, i.e. wet peatlands, store more carbon than tropical rainforests. So if we can get these natural giant sponges functioning effectively, they'll lock away huge amounts of carbon and store huge volumes of water. Afric Highlands, west of Inverness, is another landscape-scale rewilding initiative. It links neighbouring glens and a series of ecological corridors. Loch Arbor Moor is another landscape-scale initiative covering 4,600 square kilometres. Carafran in the Borders is a brilliant example of community rewilding. 20 years ago, this valley was bare, but today, thanks to the work of local volunteers, the community itself, trees are marching up the hillside, birdsong is returning, flowers are returning as well. One of the biggest transformations in recent years has been the approach to river restoration. Up and down the UK, hundreds, if not thousands of people are coming together from different backgrounds to restore rivers at a catchment scale, from the headwaters to the sea. And it makes perfect sense. Rivers provide common ground. Everyone wants to see clean rivers full of fish. So there are now active restoration projects on the Spey, the Dee, the Tweed, the Laxford, the Allen, the Feshie. The list is almost endless. And what is inspiring about this, I think, is not the planting or the regeneration of riverside trees or the re-wiggling of river channels or the placement of woody structures to replicate the work of beavers, or actually even the reintroduction of beavers. Exciting as all those things are, what really hits it home for me is the change in thinking, the change in attitudes, the change in perceptions. More people thinking like a mountain or a river. 5 years ago, Scotland the Big Picture was approached by two farmers asking how to rewild their land. So it was apparent that they had the appetite for nature recovery, but they faced barriers. They maybe lacked knowledge, they lacked funding, maybe even they lacked confidence. So those two farmers inspired what has now become the Northwoods Rewilding Network, which brings together a diverse community of farmers, crofters, small estate owners and community landowners, all committed to nature recovery. So in 2020 we started off with just 2 sites, but over the last 5 years that's grown to 100, covering 30,000 acres, a series of ecological stepping stones across the country. Now, Northwoods is unique in Scotland in that all of its land partners own or steward less than 1,000 acres. And this is a deliberate approach to allow small and medium-sized landowners to contribute. They maybe don't have the resources of these big estates, but they can still make a valuable contribution to nature recovery. The network is underpinned by a set of core rewilding principles. We call them the Northwoods 9. And based on these principles, we sit down with every partner and agree a 5-year rewilding plan. And it's then our team on the ground who is responsible for putting that plan into action and making rewilding happen. So this is the dashboard. I know you can't read all of this. I'm not going to go through the figures. You can pick up this graphic on the Scotland the Big Picture website. There's lots of impact there. I'll leave it at that. But really the headline for me, more than the physical impact, has been the impact delivered by supporting and enabling a wide range of land partners, as opposed to the traditional approach, perhaps, of buying land and then managing it. Now, that model has some caveats and some compromises, but I believe that in terms of value for money, in terms of bang for buck, you get a lot more return from supporting a wide range of land partners on their own ground than trying to own it yourself. So it's just something to chew on. It's a far more efficient model for getting stuff done. This is a really crappy photograph of my house in 1996. So I live in the Cairns, at a place called Ballingeen. We're a Northwoods partner. Now Ballingeen used to be a riding centre. There were 52 horses crammed into 130 acres. And I hope that you can see, is that going to work? No, it's not going to work. I hope you can see the impact of 52 horses grazing 24 hours a day, 364 days a year. Shaved is a word that I often use. This is the old steading next to our house. And again, I'm just going to draw your attention to the foreground, the vegetation in the foreground. Again, more shaving. This is the steading today. So all we've done really to facilitate this change over 30 years is to reduce the grazing pressure. The horses all went back to their homes and let nature lead. We are what you might call passive rewilders. Some might call it lazy rewilders who basically do nothing. This is another image looking along the floodplain, and again I think you can see that it's pretty much like a bowling green. And this is that same landscape today. So hopefully much more complex, more diverse, and again all we've done really is just given nature a bit of space and freedom to recover. One of the reasons that Northwoods has expanded so quickly is because of the stories we tell about our partners' successes, using visual imagery to communicate stories of hope and possibility. This is a beaver release, as you can see. And I know from my own experience that showing people the difference that rewilding can make can be hugely impactful and can help inspire others. So 5 years ago there was no Northwoods, and if I'm honest I'd probably struggle to list rewilding projects in Scotland on one hand. But today that's completely changed. Rewilding is growing in momentum, in impact and in ambition. They say that a landscape without wildlife is just scenery. In 1954, ospreys returned to breed in Scotland after 60 years of being absent. They were persecuted to extinction in 1916. Since then, red kites and white-tailed eagles have been reintroduced and are now breeding in places where they've not been seen in generations. Golden eagles have been returned to the Scottish borders, and in recent years, wildcats have been released into the Cairns. Badgers and otters and pine martens are all bouncing back. And this brings us to a critical junction, I think, in our future relationship with wildlife or with nature. Because as wildlife starts to recover, it finds itself confronted by a species that has forgotten how to live alongside wild nature. I regularly have people now telling me that there are too many pine martens, too many badgers, too many otters, buzzards, seals, cormorants, ravens, too many inconvenient, undesirable species, too many bad animals. But what does too many actually mean? I've asked that question many times and never received a coherent answer. More often than not, too many means more than they used to be, more than people can remember in their lifetimes. It's a classic case of shifting baseline, the challenge of imagining a world different from the one we grew up in or are familiar with. But if as a society we agree that we cannot save nature piece by piece, if we accept that wholeness that Doug Chadwick spoke about, we can't just pick and choose the animals we like or profit from, but we're fickle. 70 years ago, less than a human lifetime, red squirrels were being killed in their tens of thousands. Today, that would be unthinkable. But we make moral judgments about other species and their entitlement to share our space. I'd like you to imagine getting home tonight, switching on the news, and up pops the presenter announcing to the world that India is going to shoot all of its tigers, or Africa, all of its lions, or Canada, all of its polar bears. I hope, we would all recoil in horror. And yet that's exactly what we've done to all our large carnivores. Scotland is now just one of a handful of European countries refusing to live with lynx. It's not that we can't. There's plenty of food, there's plenty of habitat. It is that we won't. Lynx, wolves and bears are now spreading across mainland Europe. There are now wolves living in Spain, France, Italy, Germany. There are now wolves in the Netherlands, of all places. So it's not that we can't, it is that we won't. Endless research tells us that apex predators are essential to healthy ecosystems, but no more so than the tiniest of insects. It's that interaction and interdependency of all species that enables nature to work. I don't think anybody is suggesting that returning lynx to Scotland is straightforward, but while we think about it, we should consider that right now we are choosing not to return lynx. We are choosing not to play our full part in restoring global ecosystems, and instead we look to other countries to live alongside animals that are infinitely more challenging than the likes of lynx. So how do we restore wildlife like the sea eagle, like the beaver, even the lynx, species that are highly valued by wider society, while still protecting the livelihoods of those directly impacted by their return? And that's a key question. And the honest answer is not easily. Because as we've heard, these are complex and often highly charged issues. But we need to find a pathway to coexistence. Because ultimately, pitching the needs of nature against the needs of people will serve neither. Conflict between people and wildlife is nothing new. In a rapidly changing world, the likelihood is that it's going to increase. So conflict itself is inevitable. But what isn't inevitable is the outcome. So ultimately, rewilding offers us all the chance to think like a mountain, to press the reset button and rethink our relationship with the wild world and our place within it. And despite different perspectives and different values, what unites us all, every single one of us, is our absolute dependence on a livable planet. And to my mind, that's the common ground on which we should build. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that extraordinary talk. I'd now like to introduce our second speaker. Louise Ramsay moved to Bamff in 1981, with her husband Paul Ramsay. And along with the Scottish Green Party and various other conservationists and climate campaigners, she co-led a campaign to protect the wild beavers of Scotland, and later has played a key role in the founding of Bamff Wildland. My apologies. She is currently managing partner of the family-run Bamff estate and writes articles and fiction, including a novel, which she might tell us about, which has been published this year. So over to you, Louise.
Good evening, everyone. So this is a little bit of our piece of land, and it has this is a little aerial view showing what I think is the longest beaver dam in the United Kingdom. It's 100 metres long, runs across there. So this is Bamff. It's a small estate, 1,300 acres, and it's on the edge of the Highlands. The Highland boundary fault runs through it, and it's also just between, in Perthshire, but on the edge of Angus. We're very much edge folk. And we've got one of these money-eating machines in the middle of it. So you can see the land goes up to 1,400 feet at the top of that picture, and the lower ground is upland. It's about 600 feet, and it's undulating. It's glacial deposits. Some of it's rather, this bit at the low ground, some of it's rather rocky and some of it's rather boggy. But historically, it was farmed and it was drained, and we made some decisions to move things on from there. So this is the looking south across Bamff to the Sidlaw Hills, and what you see is not nature, it's a designed landscape. There are lots of nice trees. They're mostly beech, planted in 1790 as a result of a landscape plan, which I'm going to talk about, and also the usual ubiquitous plantations of conifers, of non-native conifers. There's some larch there, some Norway spruce and some Sitka spruce. Our neighbours have even more Sitka spruce. We're surrounded by all that kind of thing. So what I'm really trying to say here is that it's quite a low starting point from the point of view of nature. Now, this is just to show you, those of you who have anything to do with land management may know the phenomenon of the IAX map. That's our estate in the compartments that it's divided into for the purposes of bureaucracy. It's a bureaucratized landscape. Is that a word? And we looked up IAX. It stands for Integrated Administration and Control System. So the government have got a huge grip on what land looks like because they fund certain things and they don't fund other things. And there are two ways you can get money for land. And of course, we all want money, so we go for it. And one of them is you can be farmland, in which case you mustn't have various things like trees. Trees are bad. Or it can be forest, in which case you mustn't have any clearings. You have to have more stems. So if there are too many stems on farmland, they take your money away. If there aren't enough stems on woodland, they take your money away. So Scotland is really either forest or field or moorland or whatever. And you really miss out everything in the middle. That whole forest edge in which nature flourishes, those areas where the dynamic processes of nature take place are often really missing. So just to nip back in time to the Iron Age, our area has quite a lot of these hut circles from the Iron Age, also the Bronze Age, and in fact it must have been farmed to some degree from the Neolithic. So there's been a lot of farming going on over time, and one assumed these hut circles would have had wooden superstructure, so there would have been more wood available back in the Iron Age, but there's been farming of some sort going on for an extremely long time. I'm sure it's very much the same in Ireland. And yes, I just thought a slightly side issue, but you might be interested to know that the name Bamff has Irish origins. In Irish mythology, I'm probably teaching you things you know here, but and correct me if I'm wrong, Bamff was part of an important triumvirate of matron goddesses with her sisters Eriu and Folda. In one version, Bamff was the first person to set foot in Ireland before the flood. When the Scoti came over from Ireland in the 5th or 6th century, perhaps they felt it looked like home. I just put this image up as a sort of image of Celtic twilight. for context. So leaping forward to the 12th century, this was, our part of the world was the royal forest of Aelith. It was a royal hunting forest, which meant that the king wouldn't let people farm, gather wood, plough, pasture, and so on. So it went through a phase of being, you know, a slightly lighter touch, more trees would have grown. But in our own, you can actually see Bamff there on the map, B-A-N-F. Obviously spelling changes over time. But in the year 1232, our little bit was granted to my husband's ancestor by King Alexander II. He was his doctor, and so he was granted this land as a reward for services rendered. That's the charter, which is, we don't have that. This is a photograph of a charter, which is in West Register House in Edinburgh. But you know, interesting to see, I thought. So by the year 1730, when this map came out, Bamff had these extremely, on the far end there, you can see very straight lines of trees. It wasn't wild at all. They tried to make it look a bit wilder in the 1790s. A designed landscape was drawn by Thomas White, a pupil of Capability Brown, and a lot of it was implemented, not all of it, partly because the laird of the day, who had commissioned it, got killed in a duel the same year, unfortunately. Now, here we are back at the present day. Well, not quite. This is just 5 years ago. And really, all the time in between and now, it's been this kind of scene. Sheep farming. Not just sheep farming, cattle farming also, some ploughing here and there, a number of mixed farming, but in recent years, predominantly sheep farming. And that's what it looks like, very nibbled. Well, although Paul was in fact sheep farming himself, he had an ecological background and an interest in doing something about restoring nature before the word rewilding had been coined. So we called it rather clumsily ecological restoration. It's got a lot more syllables. And so these things were carried out where the grants allowed. So again, we're in the bureaucratic landscape. Farm woodland schemes were planted from the 80s in the 80s and 90s. Native pine woods on the hill. Reverse drainage was undertaken, beginning the process of wetland creation from 1992. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then, by good luck, not really through our doing, the farm went organic in 1995. So that was a beginning of improvement. This strip just near our house was Norway spruce until 1988. And most of these trees grew up by themselves, actually. There was a planting scheme, but a lot of the planted ones died, and so a lot of this is natural regeneration. So a certain amount has got underway. And these guys have really done well at Bamff. And when we first came, there were grey squirrels as well as red squirrels. But the greys, well, touch wood, have not been seen for a long time. And I think that's probably largely because of the return of the pine marten, which is just good luck from our point of view, probably not anything to do with our management. From the point of view of wetlands, I've just got this little quote from the RSPB, which I think is very interesting. For decades, the value of wetlands has been misunderstood. As a result, over 60% of the world's wetlands have been lost since 1900. In Scotland's wetlands have suffered an even worse fate, with 85% now lost. So we had this idea, Paul had this idea, to bring in beavers. And this is one of the 60 or so beaver dams that we have on our land. So beavers came to Bamff in 2002 to recreate wetland, to improve biodiversity, and to act as a demonstration project for Scotland. I have to say that the powers that be were not necessarily looking at it that way. They saw us as having gone a bit rogue. But they were in enclosures, so they were completely legal, at the outset anyway. So the biodiversity really did grow around the pools. And here's some examples of water snail. We've got the most insane number of frogs, toads and newts. Not necessarily new species, but a greater plenitude of what was there. The new ones that we have seen actually are dippers, which we didn't used to have, and the occasional kingfisher, which I've never seen, but I believe they have been seen at Bamff. And yes, this is a photograph from Bamff of a woodpecker nesting in a tree drowned by beaver activity. It's not necessarily in the pools themselves, it's in and around that you get this increased biodiversity. And here's another example of biodiversity around the pools. Paul goes out most evenings in the summer to watch beavers, and he takes guests with him a great deal of the time. So here's one of the beavers. Now, this is the wetland engineer, let's say herself. You can't actually tell them apart, the sexes, so let's assume she's female, a female engineer. I know beavers are probably, I understand that it's a pretty difficult question whether it would be appropriate to reintroduce them to Ireland, since they weren't here in the Holocene, but on the other hand were here presumably in the last interglacial and co-evolved with all the wildlife that is here. So I don't know, you guys probably...
Oh, that one's a female by the length of her eyelashes.
Oh yes, okay. Anyway, there she is, working where they're always at work. It's true that beavers are very busy animals. They have a big job to do, creating all these dams and maintaining them. And they're very delightful to watch. So we have, luckily, got quite a lot of research going on at Bamff, mainly by Stirling University. And we've had, this is a very simple summary of some of it. 300% increase in aquatic plants over 10 years. Aquatic invertebrates have gone from 77 species found in 2003, 150 in 2013, and 220 in 2023. I just made a graph so that you can just see it very visually. So that's a pretty impressive. One wonders where that graph is going. And just so that you can have a little look from the sky at the beaver dams and the pools, you can see this very straight ditch running down through the land in the typical way, trying to drain this rather boggy mire. And all these dams, dam, dam, dam. And of course the braiding of the water, as you see as you go along, little rivulets going off to the side, pushing the water laterally. All of this means that we hold a great deal of water on the land and prevent downstream flooding. And there's water during droughts when you need it. There are times when we've used the water to water the garden when there's a drought. So that goes on down, and then it goes down into the trees. And here we're just about to come to an old boating pond, which has been essentially restored by the beavers because they've built up the barrage. And the overflow from this runs down our front drive. And again, it's dam, dam, dam all the way. And so they've really created this extraordinarily wet, interesting, biodiverse landscape. And beaver dams, sometimes after heavy rain, they can look like this. Very, very, lots of little waterfalls. So we were quite pleased with what we'd done with the beavers, and we invited George Monbiot, who Pete mentioned in the connection with the book Feral, to come and visit, to see our beaver wetlands. And he loved them, but he asked us this very awkward question. What are you going to do with the rest of the land? And he looked to the right and left, and there were all these sheep. And I said rather lamely, oh, well, it is an organic sheep farm. And then I thought about the fact that I'd read Feral, of course, and I thought of sheep-wrecked hillsides and woolly maggots. And I thought he's not going to be very impressed with that, and indeed he wasn't. And he encouraged us to go and look at Knepp, which we did, and in fact got extremely inspired by seeing it. So we came back to Bamff bursting with the idea that we may perhaps do something more ourselves. And we looked at some of Bamff. We thought, it's really looking okay, isn't it? Some of it's pretty good. This is our drive. Apart from roe deer, there were no herbivores grazing this most of the time. except when the sheep or the cattle got out, and occasionally maybe wild boar at one point, but that's another story I'm not going to tell today. And just remember that the rest of it looked like this, nibbled to the bone. So while we were thinking about it, we decided to plant some more hill woods. And so we're up on our hill now, and we planted the last bit that hadn't been planted with native pine woods. We planted it with native broadleaves. And you can see in the distance our neighbour's Sitka forest, which is pretty typical of our part of the country. This is you have to get, in these situations, you have to get these sort of great big evil surveyors to advise you, to make sure you get the grant and everything's done properly. So this is the map that they drew for us. They're not really evil, well, arguably. So, at this point, a female collective forms. This is me and daughter Sophie and granddaughter Flora. Sophie and Flora and Sophie's partner Dave had come to live at Bamff with a view to helping us to run it. And, between us, we decided we really got to get on with it and do something more. We wanted to rewild on the same principles of NEP, using small numbers of cattle, pigs and ponies. And I'm going to talk some more about why we chose these species. But we had to persuade our neighbour, who was our farm contractor, who we liked very much and didn't want to upset. And we believe in just transition. But after some consideration, and also the good luck of getting a wind farm on his land, which altered his financial position, he supported our plan and helped us to shape it. So you've seen this map before, but this time I'm going to point out the red line. This is our perimeter fence. We conceived of this perimeter fence. We wanted to take this area and rewild it within that fence, within that area. So that's essentially 12 fields and 6 woods, and it comes to 450 acres, thereabouts, anyway. So why Bamff? Well, we put together this management plan, and this was our very first statement. Why Bamff? Rewilding on a normal agricultural budget, on a middle-sized landholding, on moderately good upland pasture, between the Highlands and the Lowlands of Scotland. We felt that we were in the Goldilocks zone, and if we could do it, then other people could too. So we would push ahead and make it happen. But to do this, we had to raise some money. So we applied for the Biodiversity Challenge Fund, a fund that the Scottish Government had come up with, and we were turned down. But, in the process, we did attract some key partners. So some of these partners gave us money, some of them gave us moral support, some of them gave us advice. But they were all important to us. And this is the map we drew, because all these funds, they're not really that interested in rewilding. They're very, very interested in interventions. And so we had to do some interventions relevant to rewilding to get some money. They weren't very interested in helping us with the fence and the natural grazing. So we came up with all these ideas for interventions. And they wanted you to prove biodiversity gain within 1 year. It's not very realistic. Some of these grants are really a bit bonkers. But so we came up with, we'd plant some wildflower seeds, we'd dig some ponds and scrapes, we'd put in hedges, we'd put in forest edge bits, wet woodland tree enclosures, wild hedge, wood pasture, and so on and so forth. There were all these bits and pieces. Anyway, we didn't get the money. So we launched a crowdfunder. We actually rang up an advisor and asked him, should we be applying for these agri-environment climate schemes? He said, no, don't touch them, he said. They're absolute hell. Do a crowdfunder. So that's what we did. And as a result, we actually managed to get the money to build most of our fence. And I don't think it actually included the money for these. We had to fork out for these ourselves, the cattle grids, because we didn't want to have 4 gates on the drives. The fence this is the perimeter fence. It's a ryelock fence with no barbed wire because we didn't want to hurt the ponies that we were planning to get. So the question really, all these philosophical questions arise of what actually it's all about. What are we trying to do? So what were the forests like? And how can we restore land that has been farmed since the Neolithic? Well, one important point is that research from Aarhus University in the Netherlands shows that 80% of woodland plants native to northern and central Europe prefer high light conditions created by large herbivores. So bring in the large herbivores in the right numbers. What are the right numbers? Well, we'll come to that. Trophic rewilding is not only about introducing apex predators, although that's very important, but any native species or proxy that can help restore ecosystem integrity at other trophic levels. Our experience was that if we fenced out small areas of farmland, we didn't see significant increase in plant diversity or regeneration of trees over more than a decade. So we had these grants to have riparian, protection, and all we got was this sort of lumpy grass. Nothing very interesting came in. No flowers, no trees, no bushes. So what was missing? There was a lack of disturbance, a lack of seed source perhaps in some cases. The impact on the soil of agriculture, for perhaps 1,000 years, but intensive agriculture in more recent years particularly, compacting by sheep, damage to soil, mycorrhiza, by ploughing, etc. So our work is experimental, but evidence from elsewhere suggests that we need natural processes brought by large herbivores and pigs. So we went for it, large herbivores and pigs. And, they do get on better than you might think. Although I think the ponies do think that the pigs are a little over-friendly at times. So natural grazing is arguably our main tool. Restoring natural processes through the introduction of native or proxy domesticated species. Creating heterogeneity of the sward, benefiting different plants. And seed dispersal from their coats and hooves, etc. Seed germination through the creation of bare ground, particularly the pig digs, and the trampling of hooves. Grazing of grasses around wildflowers, enabling wildflowers to compete. Nutrient cycling, manure, molt and carcasses. Molt is important, that's something we've learnt, that it plays an important role, and soil structure. So, and why cattle? Well, cattle are a proxy for the aurochs, of course, that lived from 700,000 years ago until the last one died in Poland in the 17th century. This is Derek, by the way, our bull. He looks quite like an aurochs, I think. They have a distinctive grazing style that promotes heterogeneity, and their dunging is important. The dung at Bamff is absolutely full of dung beetles, which are obviously very important. And you only get that, you have to obviously be organic for that, because otherwise you're killing them. Pigs, why Tamworths? Well, we're using pigs as a proxy for wild boar. Their digs are vital to the opening of the agricultural sward, allowing other species in. Tamworths are one of the oldest and most resilient breeds. The reason we're not using wild boar is that they are classed as dangerous wild animals, and so there are some kind of insurance issues around them. And you have to get a license and so on, and they're more difficult to keep in. They can jump fences, dig under fences and things like that. We've had wild boar, we know about them, we love them, would love to have them, but currently we have pigs, and they do the job quite well. So why ponies? Why Exmoors? Ponies are part of our native fauna, also earliest remains from 700,000 years ago. They help create habitat mosaics through their grazing patterns. They create short lawns, tend to avoid eating flowers, and lead to an increase in floristic diversity and abundance. We're very lucky with our ponies, because they came to us because of a lady who'd just done a PhD on ponies, and she had them at the Glasgow University veterinary farm, and she was asked to remove them at the end of her PhD, and where was she to put them? So we said, yes, please, we'll have them. And she had actually proved in her PhD all this stuff about floristic diversity, it actually happens, and also that Exmoors are a primitive archetype, not a breed. They are, in fact, very much the same ponies that you see on the cave paintings. They just showed up in Exmoor sometime after the Ice Age and hung out there ever since. And obviously some of them have been taken off and crossbred, but the ones that stayed there were not bred by humans. And so as a result, the closest living animal to the wild pony of Europe. And they've retained wild traits by living in semi-wild conditions on Exmoor. These traits will only survive if they continue to live in semi-wild conditions. So essentially, wild ponies, the ponies need rewilding projects, and the rewilding projects need ponies. So it's a happy symbiosis. Here's another thing that happens, just by itself. The blackthorn suckers out of the hedges. And where we've got, some places we've got hedge extensions just fencing them so the actual the grazers can't get in. In other places we don't. The blackthorn gets very thick and tall where there's no grazing, but it also survives okay where there is. It's just a bit more chewed away. Nothing succeeds like succession. We're always being told by foresters that we should get rid of broom because it's a forest weed. Well, we think it's a forest nurse crop, and here is the birch coming up through the broom. Birch also comes up through gorse. We have a hill near us where it's covered in gorse and it's now turning into a birchwood. It's happened over the last 20 years since they took the sheep off. So the grassy sward, what is actually going on? The data is still being collected and collated both by our volunteers and by our PhD guy, Patrick Cook. But the difference between last year and this year is an increase from 35 species to 71 species in our rewilding fields. And our neighbour's field, which is a conventional farm, I think they've got about 17 species. So, we're already quite a lot higher. Patrick reports the pigs have made the most difference, bringing in creeping buttercup and germander speedwell, but the ponies have broken up rushy areas, allowing more flowers in. So here's a typical picture of what our sward looked like in June this year. I just was going around with my phone going click, 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 because I was just so excited to see all this. They're not, obviously this previous one, we've got an orchid in the middle, which is in the pasture, and that's new to us. This was really, you've seen it before, it was just nibbled grass, and now we have pretty common flowers, but the variety will go up as years go by. So we've called our project Catalysed Rewilding, and the reason really is because we reckon we've got quite a low starting point. Most of our trees are beeches, which are not native to Scotland, they're not quite native to Scotland, and there's a lack of hedges, there isn't a huge amount of all the species that you want to see more of. So we wanted to just boost it a bit at the beginning. So that, I think, is something we were fully in agreement with. But the other thing is that these grants are always insisting on biodiversity gain. And so to some extent we've had to go with that as well. This is a seed island that the Woodland Trust paid for us to have, and we've got quite a lot of these, which is great. We, as a result of one of the grants we got, we planted patches of yellow rattle. And just quickly, in case anyone doesn't know, yellow rattle is a native wildflower which is semi-parasitical on the roots of grass. And so it reduces the grip that the grass has on the land. We've dug ponds and scrapes principally, I suppose, for waders. But interestingly, we still don't have any nesting waders. We lost our pewits and our curlews in the 90s, I think, 90s, that kind of time. They haven't come back. I think the reason they haven't come back is that there are very few dispersers because the population is so completely knackered in Scotland. There are very, very few left in general, so they're not looking for anywhere to go. And if they were, I suspect they would consider Bamff a rough district because we've got a lot of mammalian predators. But we don't want to just kill our mammalian predators in order to have waders because we're rewilding, we're not doing conservation. Eventually we probably will get waders, but we'll see. Removal of INS, invasive non-native species. Mainly so far it's been Rhododendron ponticum, but we also have some crassula to get rid of, and some Himalayan balsam. The rhododendron we've had a combination of volunteers and grants doing it. And we've planted wildflower seeds. This day was funded by Bug Life, who are creating a beeline from Dunkeld to Montrose, which happily we're on. And so families came to help raking the seeds into mole hills and pig digs. And so we've now got quite a lot of wildflowers, other than yellow rattle. It's probably helping the process. This is an intervention that we did with the help of Northwoods. We built somebody came, I mean, when I say we, it wasn't us, somebody came and built 2 osprey platforms, and the ospreys there's been sort of a degree of success. They've very much found them. Last year there was a chick, the chick didn't survive, but we're at the beginning of what I hope will be osprey, enhancement. So monitoring is guided by our steering group. A steering group is a really key thing. If you're thinking of starting a rewilding project, have a steering group. It's absolutely wonderful. We've got all these marvellous neighbours volunteering, not all of them neighbours, some of them further away, because of course we could do it on Zoom, advising us, which stop us going off at tangents and keep us focused on the project. We've put together this great big monitoring plan, the 5 big questions. I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but we were told when we showed this to Professor Nigel Wilby at Stirling, he said that's millions of pounds worth of research. But actually we're achieving quite a lot of it with the help of volunteers. It turns out there are experts on almost every subject living within 5 miles of us. So it's quite extraordinary. So we did actually pay for this, the Phase 1 habitats map at the beginning. Here's a monitoring done by citizen science. Yeah, there's a huge amount of research has been going. There are currently 7 PhDs underway, and a moth and butterfly survey has been carried out every two years as part of a PhD. This was last year. We've got early morning moth counting, and this is a elephant hawk moth. Can't remember what that one is. That's a garden tiger. We also did a research sharing day this year, when we invited all the different people, the volunteers and the PhD students and various other people, to come and give presentations to each other. But this is the really key question: how do we fund it? Well, the answer is it's a little precarious, but we still get the basic payment. The trouble with the basic payment is that every time we do something really good, like plant a seed island, we have to cut it out of the payment because it's an eligible feature. So we've got all these other ways of making money: holiday lets, guided walks, beaver watching, occasional grants, volunteering. There are huge questions about carbon. We did register carbon for our Hillwood, and questions about nature finance, which seems to be very theoretical. Just flick through this, our holiday lets. We also did the volunteering project. We had a huge amount of fence removed by volunteers. There it is. That's only some of it, actually. And what are the barriers? So we've got the basic payment actively disincentivises rewilding because of ineligible features rules. We had complicated things about whether we could keep fences or not. We've managed to keep the basic payment by owning some cattle. The current legal framework is in opposition to rewilding. For example, plants listed in the Injurious Weeds Act are the ones that grow when you start rewilding, and they're all native plants that are actually essential to biodiversity and succession. Rules for the care of livestock are not very suited to free-ranging animals. We also have a vision, but I think I'm going to skip past this because I know there's very little time left, but we have got a vision for something in the local area to extend what we're doing. And, we wanted to look more like that and less like that. That's what it's like at the moment. And this is the broader movement, which Peter's really talked about already. This group here are from Rewilding Europe, and we're hugely supported by the Northwoods Rewilding Network, Scotland the Big Picture, the Scottish Rewilding Alliance, which are all spin-offs of each other, and they're all excellent. Rewilding Britain, Rewilding Europe, the Global Rewilding Alliance, to which Sophie and the Bamff Steering Group recently contributed a paper on beavers at Bamff for a Ramsay report on the role of animals in wetlands. So we've had a lot of, I don't know if there's going to be time for this. This is just a lovely little film. It's 1 week in June on a beaver dam last year for a minute. Is that okay, Chair?
I'm not going to stop people
Yeah.
watching beavers.
Yes, this is a pine marten with a young moorhen in its mouth. One of the things very funny about this video is that the two beavers basically disagree about where the wood ought to be. Yeah. And this duckling's got lost. You can see this. I'm like, no, not there. Now this one, the baby beaver, the kit, has gone too far downstream, and Dad's gone to fetch him in his mouth and brought him home. Well, I'm assuming it's father and son, but I could be wrong. And then more repairs to be done on the dam. And in a minute you'll see why the parent beaver was so worried about the kit. Because, not so much, I don't think, the pine marten, but yes, this guy, the otter. And here's another one, another two. He's still moving this time. And then the adults do finally make it up after all that disagreement. So this is a separate question. This is the book that was briefly mentioned earlier. So if any of you like reading fiction, this is fiction somewhat inspired by my life. Thank you.
It's 9 o'clock, so we've got a good half an hour to do the Q&A. And I might just take 1 or 2 minutes just to let you know a little bit about the Irish Wildlife Trust before we go to the floor, but don't worry, I won't go on for too long. So yeah, this is an event co-organised by our partners in Trinity College Centre for Environmental Humanities and the Irish Wildlife Trust. And we in the Irish Wildlife Trust have been sort of proponents of rewilding for quite a while, and we've committed to doing work on it as we go forward in the future. So our 3 pillars of work are communities for nature, our advocacy for nature, which some people may be aware of our advocacy work, and rewilding in Ireland. So this is really important for us to sort of learn from people who are further ahead than Ireland with rewilding. So thank you to Peter and Louise coming over from Scotland to share their stories with us. So it's been really amazing to hear of all the work going on just across the sea. And it's something we can, I know it's not, as Peter said, Scotland's not perfect ecologically, but it's certainly something we can aim for over here in Ireland. And I was taking notes, and I might just start one quick question or observation from myself, and then we'll go to the floor. So I was just going to, there's a huge amount in there. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier in your talk, Peter, that I just thought I'd ask Peter and Louise to just maybe comment on was well, it's very clear from your talk that humans are an integral part of this whole thing of making rewilding work and saving nature. on this planet. And you were talking about rewilding, creating opportunities for people and for communities. So maybe just if you have any sort of thoughts on that, or even just examples of how in Scotland that's actually worked. I know you had some images on the slides, but if there's any one or two examples you want to dwell on where communities can benefit either ecotourism or ways to make a living or anything like that, that would be great. And then I'm sure Louise has something to add to that as well. That would be great.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, this notion of how does rewilding benefit people, I think it's not yet a proven case. There's no blueprint that you can lay down and say that's the answer to that question. I suppose going back not very long ago, the economic benefit with rewilding was always related to ecotourism, however you define that. I think that was always naive to assume that everybody can make a living from tourism even if they wanted to. So we are now seeing a diversification of employment opportunities. I outlined some of them that are coming along on the back of nature restoration or rewilding. I think it's still fertile ground that's yet to fulfil its complete potential. The whole business of what we call nature finance, natural capital finance, whatever, has huge potential, but it has significant red flags as well. So that's an evolving conversation. So I think in answer to your question, there are concrete examples where people are already benefiting socially, culturally and economically from rewilding. I'm one of them, Louise and Paul too, but it's a journey, and I think that journey is properly matured yet.
Yeah.
I think there's another important question here, and that is, how do people get paid to farm in the countryside, actually in the remoter and less agriculturally rich bits of the countryside? And the answer is they get paid by subsidies. And a lot of the reason that we don't have wild habitat in Scotland is because people are paid to keep sheep. Essentially, they're told if you keep sheep and you keep your place reasonably grazed, it doesn't have any of these ineligible features, then you'll get some money. It isn't very much money, but it's something. And so if they and John Swinney happens to be our local MSP, so I know him quite well, has said he wants to keep the basic payment because he says it's a rural subsidy. It's nothing to do with farming, it's to do with supporting poor rural areas. And I mean, I think our feeling is that a really good starting point would be to redefine what this money is for. At the moment, they take it away when you're rewilding. And if they just stopped doing that, there would be money going into these rural areas. I think they should give you some criteria. I think it's totally reasonable that they don't just pay you to own land. Obviously, that would be immoral. They should say, if you own your land and you have a rewilding plan and you're monitoring it and you're getting rid of your invasive non-natives and you're organising activities and allowing and enhancing access and so on and so forth, then you could get paid. I'm sure there should be criteria. But I think, the public funding side of it, if they're going to keep giving out public funding, they should give it out on a different basis, not current basis.
So the rewilding itself could be the source of income potentially if there was a change to the bureaucracy.
I mean, obviously it's much better if there are businesses as well.
Okay, well, sure, we'll go to the floor. I'm sure there's loads of burning questions. One person's got his hand up over there. Fabiola, you can...
Yeah, thank you. I just want to sound a note of caution here. I think one of the things which is not desirable in terms of ecology is this a compulsion always to do something, is to always kind of need, this human need to improve or change the environment continuously. And I mean, I think that what is very important is to appreciate first what we have around us. And often there's an awful lot of wildlife in our environment, no matter where you are, but a lot of the time people are unaware of what wildlife's there. And the first step for me, I would say, in starting to move things in a better direction is educating oneself to learn what is around. And nature is nothing if not subtle. There's an awful lot of subtlety in nature, and you know that there's often a diversity on our doorsteps that you know it is something to build on rather than just go in and clumsily start trying to improve everything. For instance, I am not comfortable with wildflower seeds. I'm not comfortable with tree planting the whole time. Sometimes tree planting is, even if it's native trees, it is not the best thing for the environment. It can actually harm the subtle dynamics that are already there. And another thing is that you have to bring the community with you. There's no point in you kind of like the community. The community, the human society, is a very complex thing, and you have to work with that dynamic and bring people. Otherwise, you just bring a backlash that undoes any positive developments that have happened. So, like, there's a complex dynamic that has to be done. Anyway, that's just one point.
Thanks. Thanks for that point. Do any of our speakers want to maybe speak back to that, speak to that at all?
Just to broadly agree with that. I don't think I disagree with any of it. When we planted trees on our hill, we never felt it was optimal. It was just what was possible at the time. I think, and wildflower seeds. I like you. I kind of question it. I wonder whether one shouldn't just wait.
I think that there has been an obsession with tree planting. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and I get it because it feels good. People like doing it. It feels good, and I get why it would be done. But I think the conversation certainly in the UK is moving away from tree planting to woodland regeneration. So in other words, to regenerate the complexity in a woodland ecosystem, predominantly through woodland regeneration. The challenge is that in areas where there is no seed source, and there are many, many areas in Scotland where there are no seed sources for miles, you could wait centuries for that to happen. So I understand what you're saying. I think we're impatient as a species generally. We do like to fiddle and garden, but there are extreme cases, I think, where nature does need a little bit of a nudge, a bit of help. But it's a difficult balance to strike.
And on the people thing, sorry, just quickly, one of the interesting things was that when our daughter had this project in which she spoke to all our farming neighbours, they all wanted to do something more for nature. They were all concerned about nature. The thing that was holding them back was money. It was nothing to do with their mindset. Their mindset was, obviously they wanted to go on farming, but they wanted to improve the lot of nature. But the financial setup was just totally against it.
Okay, we've got, so Fabiola's found someone down the back, and then we've got Borg here at the front. So maybe if you just want to say your name as well while you're asking your question.
Richard Nairn is my name.
Thanks, Richard.
I wanted to ask Peter a bit more about the Northwoods network of small and medium landowners. The reason I ask is that I'm a small landowner in County Wicklow, and 3 years ago with a group of friends, other neighbouring landowners, we set up a network which we call the Wildland Network. Just describes what it is. We now have over 60 landowners, all small, some tiny, a few acres, others up to 300 acres. Each of whom is doing something. It may be small features like ponds, it can be corners of fields, but it also can be quite significant areas. And we've reached a point where we're wondering, well, what do we do next? It's a WhatsApp group, and we have farm walks through the summer to the sides so that people can learn from each other. So it's essentially support and advice to all those landowners. No money involved, they're all doing it themselves. So I'm interested to hear what the equivalent in Scotland is, although it's much wider, I gather.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say there's a huge gap. Because I didn't know of the Wildland Network, so congratulations for that. Yeah, I suppose it really does come down to what you want to achieve. I've now left Scotland Big Picture, so I'm probably not qualified to comment, but certainly at the time I left, we felt that probably about 100 land partners was about the limit before it started to get really unwieldy. The team that is required to facilitate and support that network is 4 strong now. You get bigger, you need more people, you need more money, so you're on that hamster wheel. I think the long-term objective for Northwoods now is to showcase the successes of the partners in order to inspire other people out with the network. So I guess, one of the aspirations you might have, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, is to use what you've achieved to date to inspire others, even out with your network or out with your area. And I mentioned the point in the talk about telling inspirational stories, because they do have a tremendous impact, because people read a story about a 50-acre farm and think, I could do that, I could put in a few ponds, I could regenerate some woodland, whatever it happens to be. And very often, landowners, as Louise says, it's not a lack of intent, it's a lack of time, money, knowledge, sometimes even confidence. Generally speaking, this is a bit of a sweeping generalisation, but people don't like to rattle the cage, they don't want to put their head above the parapet, they don't want to upset their neighbours, they don't want to come, they don't want to get somebody...
So I would add to that I think a lot of the small landowners who are doing something of their own initiative are not aware that there are lots of others in the area who are doing similar things, and they get great support by meeting them, socialising, and realising them that they're not weirdos, that they are actually doing something useful.
Yeah, and another very, very quickly, really impactful thing, if not the most impactful thing, I think, is getting people to those sites and just showing them. I can go back when I first visited Bamff 25 years ago. I was inspired by what Paul and Louise were doing at the time, never mind what they've gone on to do since. So I think there's real value in getting people to a site, meeting the owner, whoever it is, having that site brought to life for them, telling their story, and they will go away at the very least better informed, if not inspired. That's it's a hugely impact. I mean, many land managers have told me, don't tell me, show me. A lot of land managers say that. So do that, show them.
Yeah.
Sorry, a bit of a rant of mine.
No, that was great. Porrig, probably always got the mic there for you.
Hi, thanks very much for the talks, they're really, really good. I have 2 questions, one each maybe. First for Peter about links, and maybe you could give us an update about where you, Scotland, are at in terms of your plans to reintroduce links. And the other question for Louise maybe, because you talked about the subsidies, and when Brexit happened, you parted ways from the common agricultural policy, and I know that there's been a new system put in place now. Is there anything there that you think is different to what was there before in terms of the common agricultural policy that is beneficial for rewilding?
Do you want me to answer that before Pete? Yes. The answer is no, not yet. The Scottish Government has been taking a long time to make up its mind what it's going to do about agricultural subsidies, and they keep announcing an announcement that they're going to announce some change, and there's a long process. We're kind of getting there now. There's now what they call a framework act, the Scottish, what is it called, the Agricultural and Rural Communities Act, Scotland, and they've now got the Christmas tree, but they've got to hang the decorations on it. And we're not, what we've heard is that they used to have basic payment, greening, AX, Agricultural Requirement Scheme, and then there was money for training. And now they're going to call the same things Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 and Tier 4. And as far as we can tell, there's no real change. But we await developments. One of the points being that Scotland wants to stay aligned with the EU in the hope that we might rejoin if we get independence. Who knows?
Which is interesting with regard to links, actually, because we've now been excused from the EU Habitats Directive courtesy of Brexit. So I think it's interesting that the SNP in particular has a desire to get back into Europe. That's a slightly different thing. Where are we with links? There are 2 active links projects in the UK. One is called Links to Scotland, and that's to reintroduce links to the Scottish Highlands. And the other is called the Missing Links Project, which kind of straddles the border between England and Scotland. Those 2, and the reason there are 2 is that there are 2 regulatory bodies that will sanction the release or not. One being Nature Scot for Scotland and Natural England for England. So, and of course the ridiculous thing is a lynx doesn't know the difference between England and Scotland, doesn't know where the border is. So both those projects are running in parallel. Both of them are in the process of putting together an application for a licence for reintroduction. Both of them are targeting a phased reintroduction. So this will be probably something like 4 animals released each year over 6-7 years. The thinking is that it's going to be captive bred for release. So some of you might be familiar with the Iberian Lynx project, whereby effectively they bred at an almost industrial scale Iberian lynx for release. That's probably the model that's going to be followed for Eurasian lynx. So all of that is ongoing. The volume around the conversation is growing all the time. Public support for lynx is growing all the time. The spanner in the works, if that's the way you want to put it, is politics. And this will, I was saying to Jamie before, this will ultimately be a political decision. And it will be made on how much political capital there is in a release or the refusal of a release. And that in turn comes down to which government and even which cabinet minister is in place at the time. I embarked on this journey in America when they reintroduced wolves, and they've been campaigning for wolf reintroduction for 35 years. And it always hit the barrier at a political level. And it was only when, just by coincidence, both at federal level and state level, the cogs in the mechanism moved in a line that the window was already open, all of a sudden opened, and wolves were back within 6 months. So that's what we're dealing with. We're ultimately, a lot of people doing a lot of work about lynx, but ultimately it will be a political decision. So watch this space.
Thanks, Peter. Well, Jamie, I just saw you put your hand up there.
Okay, I have one here, and then is that okay?
That's all right, Fabiola, you got the mic.
Sorry, Jamie. Andrew O'Connor, again, thanks to you both. You have fascinating and inspiring talks. 2 short questions. The first one's probably the easiest one. I just want to know Louise, when you did the crowdfunding, did you offer anything to the investors, or was it just?
Yes, we offered them 1 or 2 things. I remember one of the things we offered was a box of beaver chips. And we packaged them with lichen, actually, so they look quite pretty. And we did a kind of Bamff wildland box with beaver cut chips in it, and a surprising number of people went for that. There were I think there were 1 or 2 slightly better things as well. You could name a copse, for example, or you could have, if the top contributors got their names carved on a board, and we've got that in our honesty shop. So yeah, a few rewards.
Great. My second question, possibly for both of you, what is your opinion on the best way to manage? You mentioned rhododendron, Louise, but I'm sure that
Sorry,
as well. Managing rhododendron in a scenario.
Well, I think it slightly depends whether you're on the. It might be different in Ireland, because I have a brother who lives in Argyll, and which has got more of an Irish kind of climate, and he claims that what we do wouldn't work for him because it's so much wetter and milder. But where we are in upland East Perthshire, what we do is we cut it with, actually for years and years and years we had a team of volunteers who used to cut it with hand saws. And they would come back and recut it and recut it and recut it. And after about the 3rd or 4th recut, it just goes away.
They came twice a winter.
They came twice in the winter. And then more recently we got money from the Nature Restoration Fund to have 2 guys with chainsaws for 2 weeks. And then that was followed up by our volunteers as secateurs, just cutting back the regrowth. And to be honest, it's pretty ongoing, but it does go eventually. And I don't know whether that would work in Ireland, because I think because you're milder and wetter here, it might not. It might be okay on the east side of Ireland.
So no treatment, just cutting.
No
So
treatment,
no pesticides?
no pesticides.
Okay.
No, but my friend in Argyll uses pesticides. Yeah.
Because perhaps with the milder weather it bounces back quicker.
It grows much faster. Yeah.
Only to say that the Alliance of Scotland's rainforest is a really good site for. There's a number of research papers on rhododendron removal in a sort of temperate, more wet, temperate climate. So it's worth a visit. There's quite a lot of information there. But it's a problem.
Okay. Jamie, your chance.
Thank you. Jamie Roach from Trinity and the Irish Wildlife Trust. We talked this earlier, Peter, but maybe you could talk a bit more about the idea of rewilding and how it compares to nature restoration and maybe the idea of wilderness.
Yeah, I'm probably not the right person to ask this question, because I have to say I get a little bit, not annoyed, but I get a little bit tetchy about the word rewilding itself. Not because I don't support it and not because I'm not prepared to sort of wear it on my arm, but I think I'm just a bit peed off really with purists arguing about what it is and what it isn't, and when it verges from ecological restoration into rewilding and then back again. As I said in the talk, anything that results in more nature for me is a good thing. Call it what you like, I don't mind. The only caveat to that, which I mentioned before, the reason Scotland, the big picture, was keen to keep it, to put its name to the word rewilding, two reasons. When others were questioning why do that when it's so toxic, and this is 10 years ago now. A, because I think rewilding conjures up hope. And for a lot of young people in particular, hope is hard to come by in this modern world. And the second thing is that rewilding is up there. Now, we may never get there in Scotland or Ireland, we may never get there in Europe, but we felt it was important for the ambition to be there. And we felt that ecological restoration or nature recovery just allowed a little bit too much wiggle room to dial down on the ambition. So we may never get rewilding according to the definition that I put up, but that's the ambition, that's the benchmark.
And it's the international word. I mean, it's
become the international word. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And we say it's 3 syllables, not 9.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who was in the marketing department for the United Nations Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, but they need a P45.
Okay. If anyone's got questions, you can put your hand up for Shara to see. But just before we go to that, I just thought it'd be interesting to see. Got a room full of people interested in this topic. So anyone can put their hand up right now. If you are doing or hoping to do some rewilding, it'd just be interesting to see if anyone is who's actually dipping their toe in the water. We've got one hand going up, 2, 3, 4. That's like an auction. Okay, so 5.
I think there were 7, 8.
Okay, so we've counted about 7. So that was just good, interesting to see where people are at, because I mean, tonight's about inspiring people, and hope is an important word. So it was just interesting to see if people were starting off on the rewilding themselves.
Sorry, it's just your question, because a lot of people aren't landowners.
I know.
So it's you're talking to the converted here, but it's just that there's no capability to do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just question that?
Go for
Because
that,
I think the lady's completely right. I would argue you don't have to be a landowner. I think there are other ways to contribute. One is advocacy, one is obviously funding, but equally, the choices that you make as a consumer, your travel choices, your clothing choices, your food choices, all make a difference. So, I think rewilding is much more about a mindset than it is about the physical change to the land and sea. There are only certain people that can make those changes, and those people are, have land. So if you haven't got any land, then you do feel a little bit inhibited, perhaps. But I would argue that it's a change in mindset as well. It's a change in your relationship with nature, and I think that applies to everybody, irrespective of whether you've got land or not.
Could I add a comment there?
Sure.
Fabiola.
It's Kate. You don't need an awful lot of land to make a start. A suburban back garden of a 1950 semi, which is what I have, you can still do a surprising amount with that. Just the week before last we saw a cricket jumping, which is a thing I had not seen for decades. But just because of storing so much dead wood around the edges and storing it intelligently, and never using pesticides, allowing a curated mess to happen, we've got so much more soil invertebrates that are present and which are just being reduced and exterminated out of existence in most suburbs and blocks of flats and everything. So even that is something like soil health is the beginning.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Thanks for that though, comment, because it was a good discussion. And I think charities have a role to try and inspire people and encourage them. So it is important to think about, obviously, very few people have a large amount of land. So we need to be thinking about supporting people to get stuck into rewilding in other ways. So thanks for that. I think Oisin had a question.
Thank you. I'm Oisin Smith from the Irish Green Party, and I want to thank you very much, Louise, for showing us around your estate and your video, very moving and entertaining with otters and beavers and everything else. Last week I had the pleasure of visiting Knepp, and it is, I just want to say that it is really important to go and physically visit those places, particularly if you're an academic. There's so much you can learn from books and from your computer, but you don't really connect until you actually go to visit somewhere, and then it gives you the energy to go on and do something else. I think you probably experienced that. What I want to ask you about, though, is more technical or less natural, which is this thing about biodiversity net gain, this credit thing that Charlie Burrell was talking about. Does that exist in Scotland, and is it something that sounds like a good thing to you? So as far as I understand, it's something like carbon credits, where you for all the biodiversity that you restore, you get some type of credit back. Does that exist in Scotland?
It doesn't really exist in Scotland. There isn't a Scottish equivalent, which is on the way. There's much less of it in Scotland because there's much less development, and so it's quite hard to get hold of. And also, I don't really like the idea of it very much. We're kind of a bit uneasy about it because I think it's actually one of the problems is that the developer would much prefer to go and do something on a completely messed up, over-farmed, completely destroyed arable field with absolutely no biodiversity at all, than come to a place like Bamff, where we're halfway there or a quarter of the way there already. And so it actually, and although that, obviously at a personal level that's quite galling, but it's also, I think it's a moral dilemma as well. I think it's a moral dilemma if you have a system which favouritised keeping your land completely at the, on the bottom rung in the hope that you could then get more gain, get paid to create gain. So yeah, we don't really have it. If we do, there is talk of various forms of nature finance in the wind. There's rather less in reality as yet. We have a conversation going on with our advisors which is connected to, when we did that hill woodland thing, the broadleaves, that was something called a woodland creation scheme, and we registered the carbon in the early days of the carbon registration, and so we do actually have some registered carbon, which I have to say our daughter has moral qualms about, but at some point in the future we probably will use that to hopefully create some kind of income or some kind of capital fund that can help us to keep going. Perhaps by going into partnership with a university or something along those lines.
That's quite distinct from the rewilding.
It's not, but no, it's distinct and not distinct, because I think we'll draw the threads together.
Yeah.
There's this thing called Carbon Plus, which is to say your carbon's worth more because it's associated with other good things, if you see what I mean.
So, Peter, do you want to add anything to that? And then we'll probably have to start finishing.
I suppose the only caveat to that, and I get it, I get why a lot of people are very nervous about it, and some people just find it vulgar to commoditise nature.
Yeah.
That too.
But the Green Finance Institute has estimated that Scotland has a shortfall of between 12 and 15 billion pounds in terms of the nature recovery budget that is required and that budget that is available through philanthropic and public funding sources. So my question at a pragmatic level would be, where else is that money coming from? So I agree that we shouldn't be putting a price on a tree or a beaver, but equally, where else is the money coming from if it's not coming from the private sector? And that's the dilemma.
I think there's also a lot of talk of very, very large sums of money. And actually, I don't necessarily think you need these huge sums. I think there's quite a lot you can do in a more modest way.
But you also have this extraordinary phenomenon of being told that here are these great city institutions who have got billions to spend, and they want to spend it, you see. And then you say, oh, but I would like it so much. And they say, but you have got 400 acres or 20 acres. What are you? It's really not worth getting out of bed to do the due diligence for a little group like you. So then you've got to try and scoop together a huge range of people, and then what happens? Well, sometimes you find that we've got these people who are in a sort of cooperative thing, and then somebody who's in a sort of intermediary role says, but look, you can get all this money, and these people won't.
This actually happened because when we put together this Fraser Bailiff group, one of the farm at the bottom of the catchment was an arable farm, and the advisor from Galbraith's, who was paid for by the government firms grant, this is a grant that we got, had this sudden whizzy notion that this one farm might be able to get it was something like £40 million to give up some bits of barley field where they were growing whiskey. And they'd say they're growing food, but they're not growing food, they're growing whiskey. Anyway, and of course this completely destabilised the whole project because people were going, well, we were quite ready to actually give up a bit of land, but not if this guy's going to get 30 million.
We are actually out of time for more questions. I'm sorry, but you could grab us at the end. Maybe we're going to go to the pub. But we're at our time. We have to leave the building. But I'm going to say one or two things and then let our speakers have the final word. So just from our end to let you all know, we have another event about rewilding coming up in November. On the 26th of November, it's Rewilding in Europe, and we have a speaker called Jens Christian Svenning already in coming over to speak. So the tickets are not on sale yet or available yet, but if you join our mailing list, you'll find out first about the tickets, and they'll go up in the next few days. So keep an eye out for that, and if you want to join, there's a QR code, or you can go to our website to join the Irish Wildlife Trust mailing list to find out about that event. And we always appreciate support for our charity, for people joining, and you can do that on our website, or Fabiola will be downstairs if you want to quickly join up on your way out or donate with Fabiola. So that's a little bit of IWT future looking bits and pieces and housekeeping. And also just to thank again our speakers for taking the time to come over from Scotland to share your insights and inspiration with this group of people here in Ireland who are trying to make a difference for nature and interested in rewilding. And thank you to our chair, Tim, for chairing the event, and for Jamie Rowe for helping organise the whole thing, and Fabiola and Charlotte working on the doors and the mics, and David, the videographer. So we got lots of people thanked. So I just thought it'd be nice to finish with the voices of the speakers rather than me just saying these random bits of information. So we had a bit of a rallying cry already from you, Peter, when you were talking about how individuals can respond who don't necessarily have land. It's always nice to finish on a rallying cry, but we've already done that. So maybe just a last thought on, I was interested in your motivation for actually starting this whole thing of trying to do rewilding. So maybe just one from both of you, just like a quick final thought on what got you into this thing in the first place, and what keeps you doing it. So something for us to finish on.
I think most people in this community, this movement, call it what you will, have a perhaps a sense of injustice that we've done some pretty shit things to nature over the last 500,000 years. That was nobody's fault. It's water under the bridge. But I think we're now at a bit of a tipping point. Scientists tell us we're at a tipping point. So, to my mind, when you wake up in the morning, you can do two things. You can do nothing, or you can do your best. That's it. And I just choose to do my best. That's it, really. It's as simple as that. So yeah, do your best.
I think I had the very good fortune to spend all my childhood holidays in mid-Argyll, which is an extremely beautiful part of Scotland. And it's pretty biodiverse. The roadside verges have the most wonderful flowers. There are remnants, quite decent-sized remnants of the what's now, wasn't then, but is now called the rainforest, the Celtic rainforest. And so I was used to seeing trees hung with lichens and, shorelines covered in limpets and ragged robin and scabious and I think every bit of countryside I saw around the United Kingdom thereafter I thought was boring and depleted, including Bamff when we first went there. And actually I more or less said to Paul when we first arrived, where have all the flowers gone? And I think he then decided he better do something about it. So, and then once my children were kind of off my hands, I joined him, and we've been working on it ever since.
Okay. Well, thanks to Paul, Louise, and Peter for coming over the water to Ireland to visit us. And was there any last words from Trinity's side? No.
Just lots of the pub.
Okay, just get the book. All right, so thank you everybody for coming out tonight.